Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com, and this is anti-war news for Friday, November 18th, 2022. So the first story at the top of antiwar.com, the US tells Ukraine to tread carefully. So this is more drama over the missile that hit Poland. Ukrainian President Zelensky's reaction to the missile that hit Poland and killed two people led the Biden administration to warn his government to tread carefully. And this is according to a report from CNN. So, as we've gone over a lot, the US, NATO, and Poland have concluded that it was most likely a Ukrainian air defense missile that landed in Polish territory. And I think at this point, it's clear that it definitely was. But when the news first broke, Zelensky and his senior advisors framed the incident as a deliberate Russian attack and called for action. And they also had some help from a U.S. intelligence official who told the Associated Press that the missile was Russian. That story has been quietly corrected by AP. And then that night, in his nightly address on Tuesday, Zelensky said it was a Russian missile attack on collective security, hitting NATO territory. A big escalation action is needed. Basically saying, NATO should respond with strikes on Russia or something like that. And sources told CNN that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan quickly called Zelensky's office after those remarks and urged officials to tread more carefully with how they were speaking about the incident. The sources said that President Biden did not speak with Zelensky on Tuesday night or Wednesday either, despite requests from the Ukrainian leader for a call. So they're saying, I guess Biden didn't take his call. It said Sullivan spoke with officials, and Blinken too spoke with his counterpart. And then, but if this report is right, that call didn't really do much, because then even after the U.S., NATO, and Poland said publicly that it was a Ukrainian missile, Zelensky rejected their conclusion. He said, "I have no doubt it was not our rocket because my military said so." So then President Biden, he publicly pushed back on Zelensky's claim when asked about them by reporters. He was asked when he got off the plane returning from Bali, Indonesia, from the G20 summit. It was early Thursday morning. Reporter said, something, "What do you think about Zelensky saying that it was a Russian missile that hit Poland?" He said, "That's not the evidence." That was his one quick reply. But I think he made it pretty clear that he's saying, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Because, with these NATO countries, Poland especially, that, there's a lot of radar systems. They probably knew pretty quickly who fired that missile. So an unnamed, and again, they're giving Ukraine the benefit of the doubt, saying it was an accident. And I've heard mixed things from military people that it could have been an accident because their air defenses were being tested by all these Russian missiles. I've heard others say there's no way it was deliberate. Who knows? To me, I'm going to just go in with accident for now. That's what my best guess is, but I could be wrong. An unnamed diplomat from a NATO country expressed frustration with Zelensky, as I went over yesterday, saying that they're openly lying, the Ukrainians. So, it shows that they're definitely not happy with how he handled this situation. And I mean, just go back to that day, how crazy everything was with that AP story and all the calls for Article 5. So then on Thursday, Zelensky backtracked on his position slightly. He walked it back a little bit, saying he was not totally sure whose missile it was. He said, quote, "I do not know exactly what happened this time 100%. The world doesn't know 100% either. I'm pretty sure it was a Russian missile," end quote. And he added that Ukrainian specialists would be allowed to take part in the investigation in Poland. So we'll see how that goes. The next one here, Kremlin says that Zelensky's demands for public talks show that he's not serious about diplomacy. So this was Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. He said, quote, "Public negotiations are hard to imagine in the first place. No talks can be held publicly, let alone negotiations in such a field. One thing is clear, Ukraine does not want to engage in talks. The special military operation marches on and its goals must be achieved," end quote. Excuse me. So Peskov was responding to comments that Zelensky made a day earlier. He said that he received signals from his Western backers that Putin desires direct negotiations with Kiev. Zelensky said that he proposed a public format for the talks because Russia is waging a public war, whatever that means. But Zelensky's comments, they did come after he met with William Burns, the CIA director. That did this, I believe it was the same day he met with Burns, and then in his nightly address, he said that he's received these signals. And now, the U.S. didn't say they discussed negotiations, but Burns did come from Turkey, where he met with his Russian counterpart, the head of the SVR. Again, the U.S. said that they didn't discuss Ukraine or negotiations, but I'm sure it came up. So you got to wonder if that had anything to do with Zelensky saying that he's received these signals. So I just mentioned in the article here that the only time peace talks between Russia and Ukraine had any hope was back in late March and early April. That's when Ukraine and Russia held in-person talks in Istanbul, followed by virtual sessions. The two sides reportedly tentatively agreed on the outlines of a deal, but it was discouraged by the West. Boris Johnson went over there and urged them not to negotiate. He said that's what he did in a phone call with Macron a few weeks later. That's not really up for debate. And then, according to Ukrainian media, he told Zelensky specifically, even if you're ready to sign a deal, we are not. And he was speaking for the collective West. And that Ukrainian report also said it was a big factor in the talks ultimately failing. All right, the next one here, more on the diplomacy side of things. The deal allowing the export of Ukrainian grain has been extended for 120 days. And this was announced by Erdogan, the Turkish president, who Turkey brokered the deal along with the UN. It was first signed back in July and has been a success as it has unlocked Ukraine's Black Sea ports. And according to Erdogan, 500 ships carrying 11 million tons of grain and other foodstuffs have left Ukraine under the deal. So he announced it. He wrote on Twitter that it was going to be extended for an additional 120 days beginning on November 19th. The deal creates safe corridors for ships leaving Ukraine. Russia briefly suspended its participation after a drone attack on its Black Sea fleet in Sevastopol, Crimea. So Russia said that attack was launched from these safe corridors. They use boat drones, unmanned boats. And they said they suspended it, but Turkey worked pretty quick to get them to agree to rejoin it, and shipments really weren't affected. But there's this other aspect of the deal, was a pledge that the UN would work with Western countries to ease restrictions on the export of Russian grain and fertilizer. U.S. sanctions technically have exemptions for agricultural goods, but they still cause major issues and delays because sanctions, as they always do, as we always see, Syria, Iran, Venezuela, they technically have exemptions, but it doesn't matter because what they do is, in this case, they discourage banks from processing transactions, with the countries that are targeted altogether. And, shipping companies, they don't want to deal with this, having their cargo checked in every port that they go to, and just all the delays. And, in some cases they have to apply for exemptions and, written letters, from the US. So, they don't want to deal with it. And Russia's saying that not enough has been done in that department. There were reports months ago saying that the U.S. was quietly encouraging the purchase of Russian fertilizer and stuff and shipment of it. But Russia's saying, it's not enough. And they were saying there was a chance that they were not going to extend this grain deal, but they ended up doing it. But the Kremlin, the Russian Foreign Ministry, they're saying that these issues still need to be worked out, and they need to be worked out within this 120 days. And the UN, Antonio Guterres, he's the head of the UN, the Secretary General, he said that he's fully committed to removing these hurdles to shipping Russian grain and fertilizer and things like that. But it goes to show, when you broker talks and use diplomacy as an option, this grain deal has been pretty successful. All right, the next one here, more Erdogan. he says that the US and Russia have no intention of using nuclear weapons. So he said this on Thursday. Um, he said that the US and Russia are not going to use nuclear weapons and that Turkey is urging more dialogue between the two countries. So his comments came after Burns met with the head of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, that's the SVR, and they held talks in Turkey. It marked the highest level face-to-face meeting between US and Russian officials since Russia invaded Ukraine. The first high-level face-to-face meeting that we know of at least. So Erdogan told reporters, quote, "Let me tell you this much. According to the information I got from my intelligence chief, neither Russia nor America has the intention to resort to using nuclear weapons. We want them to come together more often. God forbid the use of nuclear weapons will trigger a new world war," end quote. So this kind of confirms, the U.S. said that they spoke about nuclear weapons, that the U.S. warned Russia against using them. Who knows exactly how the conversation went down, but I think this confirms that that was definitely a topic that they discussed. And the Kremlin on Thursday, they reaffirmed that they don't have plans to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So, of course, back in September, Putin warned that he would use all the weapons at Russia's disposal to protect its territorial integrity. And other Russian officials confirmed he was talking about, that includes nuclear weapons, and that also includes the new territories that Russia has annexed in Ukraine. So since then, Russian officials have downplayed the comments, saying, that they fall in line with Russia's military doctrine, but they were significant. I mean, it was a big warning because it came as Russia was annexing the territory it captured in Ukraine. So that means that they would consider attacks on that territory as attacks on Russia. But things have cooled down. Putin did say recently that he said that he has no plans to use nuclear weapons. And now you have the Kremlin reaffirming that in these comments from Erdogan. So I think on that front, tensions have settled between the U.S. and Russia. And we know now that there is a lot of dialogue happening. Jake Sullivan was speaking with Russian officials. Burns. They're also saying that they're going to restart talks under the New START Treaty, which is the last nuclear treaty between the U.S. and Russia. And then you have Zelensky saying that he's seen signals. But again, the U.S. has big plans to keep supporting this war. But I think things have definitely cooled down a bit, at least. And I think that's good between the U.S. and Russia. The next one here, House Republicans introduce a resolution to audit Ukraine aid. So a group of House Republicans introduced a bill on Thursday to audit the funds that Congress has approved to spend on the war in Ukraine. So that effort is being led by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is a Republican from Georgia. And it's supported by a small group, but a group of Republicans that have been critical of U.S. aid to Ukraine, which include Thomas Massie from Kentucky, Matt Gaetz from Florida, Barry Moore of Alabama, Andrew Clyde of Georgia, and Corey Mills, who was just elected, so he's not sworn in yet. He's a representative-elect from Florida. So it's good to see like a new guy coming in is supporting this. But according to The Hill, Greene introduced the bill as a privileged resolution, meaning that it will be sent to the relevant committee, which will have 14 business days to either reject the legislation or approve it for a vote on the House floor. If the bill is not discussed by the committee within 14 days, Greene has the option to force a House vote. Greene said she's prepared to reintroduce the bill in the next Congress when Republicans have a majority in the House. She said, quote, "I'll introduce this resolution again, but I'll also be calling for a full audit. We voted no to send money over there, but we're also going to audit what's happening in Ukraine," end quote. So I know Greene, Gaetz, and Massie voted against the aid. I don't know about Clyde and Moore. I'm sure, she said that they did, so I'm sure that they did. And there was a significant group, the $40 billion Ukraine aid bill is the one you could really tell, because some of the other ones were mixed in with all sorts of stuff. So people voted no, but it could have been over something else. But that $40 billion bill, there was, I believe, 57 House Republicans. which, considering how big the House is, it's small, but it's not insignificant. That's a significant number of people that voted against it, I think. And while most Republicans still support spending on the war in Ukraine, many have come out in favor of increasing oversight of the aid. You hear a lot more Republicans now that are all about sending weapons over there are saying, yeah, oversight, an inspector general is probably a good idea, which, when it comes to this stuff, Afghanistan had an inspector general that didn't change anything. All it did was, it gave us a lot of good reference for how wasteful and useless the whole nation building exercise was in Afghanistan. And Scott Horton has said, it makes a good it gives you a lot of good footnotes if you're writing a book about Afghanistan. So, what would this really do? I don't know, but I still think it's good to see this, something like this happen. And it seems like more people are into the idea because, the White House just asked Congress for another just huge aid package for $37.7 billion. And if my tracking and math is correct, that would bring the total U.S. spending on the war to about $105 billion. And that's not just all military aid. It's all sorts of this budgetary aid. They just hand directly to the Ukrainian government and just other kind of things. But it's just such an incredible amount of money. Russia's annual military budget for 2021 was $67 billion. And this $105 billion would, if they spend it at the rate that they've been spending it at, it would bring us to probably May. So it's just a little more than a year from February, let's say March, because Russia invaded at the end of February. So from March 2022 to March 2023 to May 2023. So like 13, 14 months, $105 billion. It's incredible. It's so much money. So I think seeing stuff like this is good. And I think if she does reintroduce it in the next Congress, because it's not going to go anywhere in this one, that could have a chance. So hopefully they care, after the midterms and everything. All right. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but I'm sure people know that Republicans did get the majority in the House. And Kevin McCarthy is going to be the Speaker of the House. And he's the one that raised all these, worried all these people when he said they're not going to write a blank check for Ukraine. All right. The next one. The U.S. is considering modifying Gray Eagle drones for Ukraine. So for months now, Ukraine has been asking the U.S. to supply powerful MQ-1C Gray Eagle drones, but Washington has held back. The Gray Eagles can fly for about 30 hours and are capable of carrying powerful Hellfire missiles, giving Ukraine the ability to strike targets deep inside Russian territory. Media reports have said that the U.S. is concerned with the risk of the Gray Eagles escalating the war, but the main concern seems to be the possibility that sensitive technology and components of the drones could end up in Russia's hands. With this concern in mind, the U.S. is considering altering Gray Eagles so that if Ukraine loses them on the battlefield, it doesn't pose as much of a risk. So it seems like they're considering just changing some of the components to less sensitive technology, but it doesn't seem like it would really change the capabilities of the Gray Eagle drones, this thing that they're considering. And, Ukraine is saying that they won't use these to strike deep inside, to strike Russian territory. But, these things are pretty serious. They can carry Hellfire missiles. The U.S. uses them a lot in their drone strikes in the Middle East and Africa. So it definitely would be considered a pretty huge escalation of U.S. aid for Ukraine. So they're saying that the U.S. Army is leading the effort in studying how they could alter these drones so that they would be safe to send over there. And they are made by General Atomics. So the Wall Street Journal, they reported last week that the Biden administration decided not to send the Gray Eagles over fear that it would send a signal to Moscow that the U.S. is encouraging Ukraine to hit targets inside Russia. But a U.S. and Ukrainian official told CNN that providing the drones has not been ruled out. So they're saying that report is not true, that it hasn't been a decision. They're just holding off for now, it seems like. But who knows? I mean, it's been a while, like for months and months. I mean, since like very early in the war, I remember seeing reports that they were considering sending these, but then they never did. So we'll see what happens with the next weapons package, which I'm sure is coming soon. All right, the next one here. This is from Jason Ditz. So the IAEA again condemns Iran over the lack of cooperation on the traces of uranium inquiry. So we hear about this a lot for years now. The IAEA has had this open investigation in Iran where they found traces of uranium at undeclared nuclear sites. And Iran has said they've cooperated and tried to explain it, and the IAEA is never happy with their explanation. And the U.S. really presses this whole thing. And other Western nations that are part of the IAEA, the Board of Governors, that are condemning this again, or maybe this is just the IAEA that's condemning it. So Iran, they said recently that they're going to send a delegation over to Vienna for talks on this issue, but that doesn't stop them from still condemning it. So what Jason mentions here, these trace particles, they're not a proliferation risk at all. And it's really just that the U.S. and the EU, and of course Israel, is making it a big issue. And Israel kind of alleged that these sites were undeclared nuclear sites, and then that's where they found the particles. And so, and I've seen Iranian officials, accuse Israel of what's the word I'm looking for, of putting these traces there, I guess, planting the evidence. And Israel has really infiltrated Iran's nuclear program. They've carried out a lot of covert attacks, a lot of with explosives planted inside their nuclear facilities. So it's not out of the question. But this is just one thing that hangs over any potential return to the nuclear deal. Not that that's happening anytime soon. I mean, that's pretty much dead. But the next one here, this is from the Cradle. It's taking a moment to load here. Armed attacks against Iranian security personnel intensify. So there have been a lot of attacks on Iranian security forces amid these protests. And on the evening of November 16th, 2 members of Iran's security forces were killed, and at least 8 others were injured in Iran, in the city of Isfahan. The assailants who carried out the attack reportedly drove by on motorcycles and opened fire on the security forces stationed in the street. So this, I thought this was good to highlight, just because, I haven't been following closely enough to say what's going on in Iran, but it does look like there are a lot of attacks on IRGC members and their security forces. And of course, there's also, demonstrators too that aren't doing this, but the attackers on motorcycles, and there's been a lot of Israeli assassinations inside Iran, and similar situation. It's always something like this. I believe one recently back in May, an IRGC colonel was gunned down near Tehran. I'm not sure if they were on motorcycles or drove by in a car, but it was something like that. So you always have to keep that in mind, that Israel is very involved inside Iran. They have a pretty serious covert presence there. So it's just something to keep in mind. All right. The last one here in the news section. This is from Tolo News, which is an Afghan news, English language Afghan news website that has stuck around since the Taliban took over. So they usually have pretty good stuff on Afghanistan. But they're saying Human Rights Watch is calling for an investigation into U.S. war crimes, what they're calling possible U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan that took place, over the past 20 years. And they're saying that there was a lot of civilian losses and stuff in Afghanistan, but there was rarely serious investigations into them. So they want to look more into that. They want more light to be shown on the U.S. war in Afghanistan. But that's it for the news for today. We have a lot of good viewpoints. As always, we have a really good one from Sam Husseini about why is the AP still protecting the source behind its false Russia-bombed Poland story. So this is really good. And he actually contacted AP because apparently their rule is that they protect the source unless it's false information. So he said, hey, why are you protecting the identity of this source? And he got a response, he said, after a long time, but they just pointed him to a correction that they issued. And this correction basically just says that they reported something that wasn't right based on information from a senior American intelligence official who spoke on the condition of anonymity. Subsequent reporting showed that the missiles were Russian made and most likely fired by Ukraine in defense against a Russian attack. So that's it. That's all they have to say for themselves. And I do wonder, that same day that all this happened, Burns was in the CIA director was in Kiev, and I don't think he would do this, but maybe I'm sure he had a team with him. So, and also a good one from Ted Snyder about the signs of diplomacy, finding a faint pulse. Good one from Kim Robinson over at the Libertarian Institute about the new All Quiet on the Western Front movie that was just released. I have to check that out because I hear it's pretty, brutal. I try to forget about this type of stuff when I'm not working, though. And then another one from Doug Bandow titled Stop Invading Haiti. And I would agree with that. But that's it for me for the whole week. It's Friday. I'll talk to you after the weekend. Share the show and do all that stuff. And support us at antiwar.com/donate. But that's it. I will be back after the weekend. Thanks for listening.